The barbarian came to be awake in the pearl mist of the Senorech dawn, staring upward into the glistening point of an iron-forged blade. The blade hung in the air without visible support to the hand that held it, then he saw the ghastly black form that thrusts the blade forward to the barbarian's throat. No time for thoughts when your pending destruction lingers inches from your last breath. He whipped the fur-pelted blankets into a geyser and dove naked over the edge of the bed to roll on the floor and turned over and over. He brought himself up against the chair where his clothes and belts hung. He already had his skull-biter in hand. He slept with that blade, every night. The pitch-black figure staggered, stepped towards the barbarian and plunged its two blades into the empty space where the barbarian once laid. That would have been me, instead of the bed, if the little people had not come in my dreams to whisper in my ears of Flatha's loveliness, the barbarian thought, and tore loose his dagger to accompany his sword. Both pointing forward at the ghastly hooded figure shrouded in its own command of darkness and shadows. This was a sword-wielding fiend. His wrists steadied, without hesitation, he thrusts both sword and dagger into the shadow ghastly figure, which then immediately fell to the floor, empty of any human form that would have held the cloak with a figurative content. It was a close thing, Crom the barbarian told himself, sitting there naked on the floor. It had been the Safari who had sent the hooded night assassin, the Safari, who hated the men of Ophir with a hate like a fierce, blazing flame, who would not hesitate at assassination to gain their aims. They were a cold, efficient breed of men, these Safari. He reminds himself of the far-flung wooden fleet ships of Mother Ophir, stretched in a thin line under the stars one night in 4 winters past. Almost always, Ophir lost her ships. Almost always, those far-ranging Sfaran ships smashed the eagle-blazoned Offern cruisers, and fled like laughing ghosts into the black infinite night. No Offern ship had ever captured a living Sfaran. Somehow, within their dark ways, if they were cornered, they would expire before their very eyes. It never failed. And, slowly, but remorselessly, the ships of Ophir were pushed back and back, away from the coast of Senorech, that are so rich in every jewel and spice known to man, and even in some that Offern man had never come to know. The people of Ophir had ordered Crom the barbarian, their new king, to Senorech. There he would make at a last parley with the High Moor who ruled the Senorech people. He was to offer alliances, trades agreements, and stop the bloodshed between their peoples. He was to prove his might as the rightful leader of Ophir. He would return to his queen Tanit, a just man to rule by her side. Too many times, at the foot of the great ruby throne of the Senorech ruler, had young Crom the barbarian seen the thin, hard lips of the High Moor twist cruelly as he lashed out at the Offern envoy. Too many times had the red flash of fury crept up his sword arm as he listened to the High Moor explaining to them the fact that the men of Ophir were no match for the relentless fury of the Safari. The High Moor, it was plain to see, was eager to ally himself with the Safari. In return, the Safari would rid him of these annoying Offerns. Only the 2 short black swords the Sfaran assassin wielded, lay smouldering on the thick pile of ash and shadows. This was the opening play in the Sfaran games of Offern extermination. The barbarian let the breath from his lungs in relief. He sat with his back propped against the leg of the chair, and the sword hand that took the life from the assassin, on his naked knee. He was a tall man, a man grown hard and fit with the wild cunning that was the hallmark of a barbarian youth. Blonde hair was cropped close to the conformations of his head, giving his face a hard, carven look. The mark of blood-filled battles was in Crom the barbarian's eyes, and in the cat-like walk and movements of his strong body. He had been forged as only a barbarian warrior would be hammered, with a cold precision to his mind and a careful hardness to his body. He came off the floor and began to dress, wrapping his midsection with a cut of leather which was held to him by a wide leather girdle and leather belts. His long sword and dagger were strapped in, lacing his feet into his high buskins. His mind went to the learned mystic, Gard, who he made Ophir's kingly representative at the court of the High Moor, overlord of Senorech. If they've made their try for me, they've already made it for him, he told the room. They know who I am, he frowned. Who led them to me? Who is living false in my presences? He tightened the leather belt strap that held his long sword close his midsection. He fastened his sword to its pivot on his hip. The door opened to a finger press, and he was out in the long hallway, moving with long strides. A woman came out of the shadows to meet him, before he had much distance between himself and the room. Crom. Crom, wait. It was one of the slave girls assigned to them for comfort and entertainment, while the negotiations went on. She was still in the gown she wore to his bed last night. It was very tight to the curves of her body. Like many warriors in the distant lands, the barbarians had a fondness for the slave girls of other lands. Unfamiliar and new to their touch and senses, they were a must-have when abroad. She was a good dancer on the tables of the drinking hall and was good for keeping his bed warm on the cold nights, far from home. Her soft hands caught his, and he could feel her body's tremblings as she came against him. Crom, you've heard. Oh, Crom, I'm scared. What'll they do to you? Talk sense, girl. He grabbed her and then he softened his voice, and told her he was well aware of this foreign actions. Her dark eyes were frightened things. They killed your king tonight. The same way, as they came for him. The High Moor has sent word that you're to leave. All of you. No more offerings in Sino Reg. The slave girl whispered in the stillness of the corridor, you are to board your ship and chart your course for home. Get out of Sino Reg and stay out. The barbarian drew a deep breath, and a vein swelled and throbbed in his hard face. He's afraid of the Sfari. Sfar if close to the High Moor's lands. May the gods curse a man so driven by fear he'd murder another man who wished him nothing but good. The slave girl shook against him. Crom, let's rouse the others. You must be on your ship and away from Sino Reg before the red dragons descend upon you and your men. There was nothing he could do now, nothing except swallow the bitter truth that he was running from a fight, that he was leaving his dead on these distant shores. Guard, the old mystic, one of his men, who had scratched names on graves from Aka jungles to the ice steppes of Makran, who had been born to the service of the Golden Eagle, and now lay with no man to whisper a prayer over his dead body. The barbarian shook himself like a cat stretching after a sleep. The anger boiled within him, locked inside his guts by his tight lips. I'm going to get his body. I'll take it back with us for a decent burial. Her hands tightened until the red nails cut into his flesh. You're a fool, Crom the barbarian. A stubborn fool that's walking to his death. Don't you understand? That's just what the High Moor wants you to do. He'll have his dragons waiting for you, like cats standing at a mouse hole in a kitchen wall. Let them wait, he growled, but her hand dragged him along the corridor, to door after door of the barracks. They roused the other Offern barbarians, 30 men in all, the most allowed in Sino Reg by the High Moor. Men tumbled from their bunks with sleep glazing their eyes, but they wakened fast enough, with the slave girl and their barbarian king to whip them into action. They found Captain Odin of the Offern flagship, Eclipse half-dressed. A small, chunky man, he showed the years of his service in the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes and the faint silver that threaded his curly black hair. Crom. Go now. Get aboard the ship. I'll bring the men, and whatever they want to take along. Sobering men in fur and leather were filing out of the barracks by twos and threes, with spear, axe, sword, and shield slung over shoulders. They moved across the city in a body, their hands gripping at the weapon of choice to defend them from any red dragons that would attack openly. The barbarian lost himself to his thoughts, the moment before Captain Odin took them out of the barracks, toward the silver hall that was the Eclipse. He stepped from the slave girl's side, into an intersecting corridor, and moved down a flight of steps to the catacombs. It was easy, down here among the sewer runoff and the rats that ran along it, to stand and wait until the boot falls faded. The slave girl came once to the ramp, and called, but her voice echoed hollowly in the cellar unanswered. By the time they got through the city and down to the ship, the barbarian was sliding through the shadows cast by the monolithic buildings, and moving along the broad avenue flanking the Jadarak Canal. Ahead of him were the white bulks of the palace keep of the High Moor of Sino Reg. Somewhere in those towering windowless edifices, the old mystic lay dead. He reached the high stone wall of the garden and was hoisting himself over the stone wall top when a dark-faced Senorej caught sight of his barbaric garb and screeched an alert. The barbarian cursed in his throat and dropped to the ground inside the garden, his sandals printing their soles deep in the loam of a bed of Thalan sunflowers. He made for the arched doorway at the near end of the gardens. At a run he came into the darkness of the groined arches. He knew his way through these labyrinthine tunnels. The hoarse, brazen pitch of the Bryhorns were startling in the Senorej morning. They'll be roaming these halls with their swords, soon enough. Cutting at every shadow, he thought. Sooner or later one of the shadows will give him up. He had to reach the old mystic's room, had to kneel there and do what must be done for guard, as guard would do for any Offern fallen in battle. They might expect him to come as he was, expect him to fight his way to the old mystic's side and kneel to whisper a prayer for him over his dead body. As an Offern it would be expected. Expected and guarded against. But Senorej was not Ophir, and in Senorej things were rarely done for spiritual reasons. The barbarian yanked his sword from its sheath as he ascended the stairwell to the top floor of the High Moor's palace. There, he will find guard the old mystic he had ordered to play king in place of himself. If red dragons or Sfaran assassins were expecting him, he was ready. Curiously, all of the rooms at the top floor of the castle were empty, save for the crumpled man who lay on his back, next to a smoldering pile of black Sfaran assassin cloaks. The barbarian went to his knees, and his lips moved. In the shared custom of Asirs and Offerns everywhere, he put his hand to the old mystic's forehead and whispered, "I swear by the blood that bonds us, you will not have died in vain." It was a simple thing, that oath. Many men had spoken it, until it had become a part of the creed of those who roamed the world. But as the barbarian let the words trail from his lips, he cursed and looked down at Guard's right palm. He grimaced, and then reason came into his head. His advisor was recently dead, not a rotting corpse. "Bishan Shima," he breathed, and leaned down, ripping with strong fingers at the palm that was clutching and hiding something. The barbarian leaned forward and untwisted from Guard's right hand a slender emerald green crystal that emitted a yellowish glow. It came away and danced in his fingers, reflecting a yellowish green glow on the wall. A crystal. He sat on his ankles and forgot that a mile away the eclipse was about to set sail. Now why in the good names of Bishan Shima did Guard have this in his hand, as they came to take his life? The Bryhorn sounded again. But this was no time to solve puzzles. With a snap of his fingers, he slipped the slender green jewel into the binding that was tied about an ankle. He went to the window and stared down at the splashing fountains and the sunflower gardens half a mile below him. The walls were lined with Senorej palace guards, inside and out, and men with the High Moor's red dragon insignia on their cloaks. They all moved here and there in the shrubbery, slashing at ferns and jungle vines with their swords and spears. They'll tire of that soon enough, he decided. Then they'll come through the palace itself, a floor at a time, working the place over with the point of a dagger and the edge of their swords. They would be expecting him to hide. They would be expecting him to keep retreating ahead of them until they trapped him high above, in this room or on the rooftop. A guard and soldier would act like that. They would do the smart and sensible thing.